Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grip's latest webinar, Confex Events, why this show format is changing the game. And we talk about games, and so this is a nice visual representation of all these amazing participants changing the game by going to your Confex event, or an event that you might be thinking of turning into a Confex, because we're seeing a lot of that at the moment. Now, I know someone says it looks a bit like Squid Game. We do not want to endorse that and get sued by Netflix. So it may or may not look a bit like a hit TV show, but it is not connected in any way. It just looks super cool. So kudos to our designer for giving us this inspiration. So without further ado, we are going to get in the line and we're going to try and win $500 million by asking some big questions about Confex events and what are Confex events at the kind of first point of call. So we've got some fantastic panelists who are going to have a chat to you today and tell you a bit about Confex events. We've got Jess Natinsky, who's SVP of Group Strategy at Hyve. We've got Sophie, who is event strategy consultant, used to be the MD Explory. We've got Marco Giberti, who's the founder and CEO of Vesuvio Ventures. He's also an investor in Grip, but he's going to be very impartial and say amazing things about us. But this isn't about selling. This is about giving you the right information to learn about Confex events, learn why they're growing, take some actionable insights back into the office to maybe improve your Confex event or come up with an event that is a Confex event. So without further ado, I think we need to ask the first question to our amazing panelists. Jess, what is a Confex event? So I'm going down the line here of when I want to get a hummus recipe, I Google it and it tells you what is a chickpea, what is hummus, then it's going to give you the recipe. So I think we've got to start right at the beginning. And I just want to find out what you think in your experience. I know Hyve does a lot of Confex events. What is a Confex event?
Yeah, absolutely. The way that we think about it internally, and as you said, there will be, I think, Confexes mean different things to different people. Even in catching up with Marco and Sophie ahead of this, we all had slightly different definitions. But the way that we think about it at Hyve is it's more than just an expo or a trade fair. It's more than just content, but it's going to be a really holistic event. We also typically have additional products. So when you think of ShopTalk or a health, there's meetings programs, there's table talks, there's other digital components or digitally led components and opportunities for connection around those traditional conference or expo elements. So we think about it in that really holistic way, that it's lots of different pieces of different types of things that serve the audience.
So can you just name one of those events? So maybe it was health or ShopTalk. Can you talk us through like the offering of one of those? What are the different component parts that makes it a Confex event?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ShopTalk is a great example. It's been in our portfolio for quite a long time now. It is a delegate-based event. So it has that kind of conference model where everybody is paying to be there. They've got a ticket. There's, of course, exceptions to that rule, but generally it's a delegate-based event. The content is really strong. So you'll have leaders across the retail tech industry that are talking about challenges that their businesses are facing, what's coming next. You'll have product announcements, lots of exciting things. So that's happening in one part. And the other part, you've got a massive show floor that has really large exhibition stands from different sponsors and exhibitors. We also will have a kind of bespoke sponsorship element. So beyond just the traditional square meters that you're selling, we'll have really cool or interesting bespoke activations. The different brands or companies will say, we want to get X out of this year's event. What can we do that's a little bit different? We then also have the hosted meetings program and meetup. So you've got the kind of paid for hosted meetings that are more buy sell. And then everybody who has a ticket to ShopTalk is eligible to participate in the meetup. So that will be many different use cases, whether it's networking, it might be buy sell, it might be meeting with media or investors, but everybody has an opportunity to participate in those double opt-in meetings. And then we've got a kind of broader suite of, you've got table talks, so retailers and brands getting together behind kind of closed door sessions away from sponsors or exhibitors, talking about interesting topics or challenges they're facing. And we'll have kind of evening events as well. So there's a lot going on. It's a really holistic offering, but when I'm talking about a Confex, like that's generally the model that I have in mind. Lots of different pieces serving different parts of an ecosystem in unique ways.
Well, I'm sold. It sounds amazing. So much going on. Where can I get my ticket to ShopTalk? Let's go. I'm not even in retail, but I want to go. Thank you. That's a brilliant overview. I'm going to come to you, Marco, because in our prep call, you called me out quite rightly because I've subsequently done my research. Like Confex, they feel quite new. And you're like, no, it's been around for ages. And yes, I did my research. And Confexes really started to come about in the 1970s where they had traditional trade shows. So that was the kind of exhibition part. And then the conference part, they added to the exhibition. So Conf X. I'm like, oh, I get it now. So you called me up on that one, and I completely hold my hat to you. And I think you have got an even better example, haven't you, when it comes to revenue, which I think is quite interesting, how you can define Confex events from the revenue splits.
Yeah, well, that's one of the few things good about being old is that you remember previous cycles. And as you can see here, I'm the oldest by far in the panel. I did Confex in the 90s, but they were different. The reality is that technology is helping Confex dramatically, and is helping all the aspects that Jessica described. Technology is a key part of improving value for delegates and exhibitors. If you see a traditional trade show, you're probably going to see 80% plus of the revenue coming from the floor, exhibit space or sponsors. On a Confex, is probably 50-50, 60-40, because the ticket is usually pretty expensive. That's a nice revenue source that you don't have on trade shows. And also, it's pretty sticky. That's why companies like Hyve, Informa, and others are buying Confex aggressively, because the business model is very attractive, because the value proposition for buyers and sellers is extremely good. They're not as big as trade shows. You're not going to see, 200,000 people walking any of these Confex shows, but the value on the delegate, the price that they're paying to attend, the quality of the content and the audience is building a very strong asset for buyers, strategic buyers like Informa, Read, or private equity buyers. And that's why the category is coming back super strong, way better than in the 90s, and bringing significantly more added value. The revenue split is different, but the margins could be as attractive or even more than trade shows.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I feel like because of these margins, we're seeing more of it. And Sophie, tell me a bit about what you're seeing in the Confex world and why you think they're kind of having a moment right now, and why things are getting more, busier in that space.
Well, I mean, I think Marco made one of the most relevant points is the attractiveness of it as a model financially. But I think looking at it from an exhibitor perspective, you can see a lot of typically bigger brands who have quite high investment across trade show portfolios are really becoming more appreciative of whether they see it as neurodiversity or the different ways of people wanting to interact with their brand, and they want to be able to offer lots of different types of experience. So if they're in a traditional trade show environment, they're starting to feel quite limited. If all the conversation can lead to is more square meters, or you can put your brand on a different type of bag or Wi-Fi, they want to be able to activate in different ways and to kind of engage in people's emotions in different ways. So a Confex just offers them more variety to be able to do that, whether that's an activation like Jessica mentioned at some of her events, whether that's being able to put a piece of thought leadership out there. It allows them to meet their marketing objectives more effectively. So you're seeing that push certainly coming from exhibitors as one of the reasons.
Yeah, because I remember, I think you said in the prep call something really interesting, which is, we're going to this world now where we're seeing a lot of marketers are having real budget pressures, and people are thinking, well, actually, I've got all these events I could go to, but I'm going to try and save budget and go to the bigger events. And is that what you're seeing, that because they want to see this ROI, they are starting to look more seriously at Confex events? And does that mean there's really only room for one winner in each market?
Yeah, it's not.
Sorry, if I may, Sophie, for a sec. I think that what Sophie is emphasizing here is the value of a meeting. And I think that the value of a meeting on a Confex will continue to grow because the audience is highly qualified. And I believe that that is what's changing the game in many ways. Sorry to interrupt, Sophie.
I mean, just before Sophie comes in on that, I think what you were saying there, Marco, what you were saying before, links, which is they're not like 200,000 participants because it's highly qualified. There aren't 200,000 people in a particular market, but it's just like really niche. Think of something like Manifest, which is all about shipping and logistics. It's like really niche, but they're the best people in that industry to be in that room at that time.
Thank you for that fantastic show, by the way.
Oh, is it one of yours?
Yeah, I'm involved on that one. But the reality, if you're a CMO, a sophisticated CMO, and you want 50 meetings, and you're comparing different events, most likely a Confex will provide the value on those 50 meetings because they're highly curated. And you don't need 2,000 meetings to make your ROI on this particular event investment. That's because, again, technology is helping to match the right buyer and the right seller, to facilitate the meeting scheduling, to provide additional value. All those things are pretty attractive on a Confex model.
I mean, I'm just going to bring in Jess here because I see she's about to chip in. Jess, like in my research, I found out that 1970s, they were offering networking at Confex events when Confex events were starting. So what's difference now? What's the difference now? Why now? Why are people really thinking about these meetings and it's being highly curated?
Yeah, I think what you mentioned earlier, the budget constraint and the real concentration to the largest event in the sector, a lot of that comes from nowadays. And one of the things that we've really focused on is you need to curate both sides of your audience, the whole ecosystem. Historically, there was really a focus on customers were paying customers, right? Your buyers aren't necessarily paying to be in the room, but you have to get them there, their cost. And the way that we think about it is they're just as important to driving revenue as the sponsors or exhibitors. So are you really giving them a compelling enough offering? Is the content really compelling for your retailers and brands, your shippers, your banks and credit unions, whatever the buyer is going to be in your industry? Are you giving them that content, and then are you giving them that ROI and efficiency? So as Marco said, right, if I'm going, it's much more compelling for me to be able to say, rather than responding to 100 LinkedIn messages, I can have 15 qualified meetings in one session. That's real value for me. That's worth a trip to Vegas or wherever we're going to end up going. And then at the same time, you're increasing that ROI for the more traditional exhibitor or sponsor. So for us, that will be the solution provider. We're not just putting you in front of 2,000 potential buyers, but we're really making sure that those meetings are going to be people who they know your product, they want to meet with you, they're excited to meet with you. And I think that difference is a really key one. Like you can't just get everyone in the room. You have to make sure that within that, you're helping take away some of the chance or serendipity, and you're really understanding what does value mean for all of the different customers or attendees or delegates that you have, and how is the offering tailored to each of those groups.
Yeah, that's great. It's the whole buyer supplier thing and making sure that they're really matched. And what I'm getting from you here is, or all of you, is that, these are really great event formats. Like Confex works, it's got a bit of everything. But Sophie, we got a question from the audience, and they said, Confex events are so good. Are large exhibitions, large trade shows, are they dead? Like, do we even need them anymore?
Well, I think each event has got to serve the purpose of its audience. I think Jess will know with this one that absolutely there are events that really are transactional, and having those large numbers of products, suppliers on display is absolutely where their value comes from. But I think equally, Jess was right to say it's not enough in many instances to see big shiny machines, go past coffee stands, the exhibitors are looking for more than just badge scans now. You're seeing that drift, that kind of purposeful shift from using events as top of funnel, which has now been replaced perhaps by social media programmatics, to seeing events as a mid-funnel activity. Now, some exhibitors can execute really well as a mid-funnel activity on a trade show floor. They're really good at engaging people, understanding on the trade show floor who they need to interact with more, moving them through the funnel. But a lot of exhibitors aren't strong at doing that. So that Confex model really helps them in terms of that sift. Who are those kind of more strategic opportunities for them? So I think it's really a case of you've got to understand what the value proposition, the why of your show. If the why is about seeing a large range of products, being able to understand quality and finish, discovery, absolutely there's a huge value still there in the traditional trade show model. But I've worked with a number of shows over this last year where that model that had previously been very successful, it was a look, see, do, discover type approach, now really saying, okay, maybe that isn't enough, and we actually do need to add more, and we do need to think more about what's a good use of time for our delegates when they have so many other opportunities to see and experience products online. What else are they going to get from their time here? So I think asking that why is really important to understand what's the right model for your audience.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Look, see, discover, do. I'm stealing that one. That might be a blog that you'll see next week, and we'll rip it off, and we won't give you any credit. But
But I
no,
guess that's different from feel, engage,
yeah,
inspire.
true.
You know, they're equally important, but it's knowing which one is right for the audience you're wanting to attract. It crosses sector. It's maybe more into this idea of your personas and the psychographics that you're serving as well. You know, what will get those senior people, the ones that are seen as high value, to really say, yes, this is a fantastic use of my time.
Yeah, and I
I,
also think,
sorry,
sorry, Marco, go on, go for
I,
it.
I think that the beauty of being around live events today is that it's not one or the other model. I think that there's a big debate, and we're going to be talking at CISO, which is a US event in the industry, about business models. And I think that Confex is live, healthy, growing, but also trade shows and also festivals and also many other models. If you see what Informa is doing with festivals, it's pretty interesting. They're building a model. You know, everyone wants to build the next South by Southwest. It's not as easy as it sounds, but some brands are moving into that direction. Confex is exploding, but it's not as easy to build as many people think. Confex is a very difficult animal because buyer-seller ratio and many other things that are critical. And trade shows, it's not as easy to launch a massive new trade show. I don't believe that we're going to see many new CES in the future, in the near future, because it's very mature and is well, developed. But again, they're pretty healthy and they're growing and they're bigger than pre-pandemic level in many industries, which means if you're a planner or if you're a young kid out of college and want to join this industry, it's a fantastic time because many business models are doing extremely well. And it's pretty clear that face-to-face is here to stay, which means it's a pretty attractive moment in the industry.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, pre-pandemic levels, things are just going crazy now, and I think people are starved of connection, and they just want to get out there and start meeting people again. Even though it was a couple of years ago now, it's still that pent-up demand, I find. And I think a big part of that is the meetings, certainly, because that's what people want to do that you can't get from a traditional, conference where you've got go and educate yourself, go and see some great talks. In the pandemic, a lot of those talks were put online, and that still happens today. Those talks, you can probably Google it and find on YouTube. That amazing keynote speaker that you want to hear has already got that same talk online that you can watch at 2x speed in bed. So what are conferences giving you? They're turning into Confexes because you get a bit of the trade show, you get to see the product, you also get to have the meetings as well. Marco, I'd be quite interested to know what sort of Confex events you see that are working quite well, because I want to give our audience some real life examples where maybe after this webinar they could just do a bit of Googling and find some shows and see what good looks like in Confex. And Sophie, I'd love to ask you that question. Jess, we've already had a few from you with ShopTalk and the others, but Marco, which ones are you seeing that are working at the moment?
Well, of course, you mentioned Manifest. I'll start with that one because I know that pretty well. I'm involved since day one on that one. I think that in technology, massive industries like logistics, for example, are underserved from a technology value proposition, which means you see many logistics trade shows all over the world, which are doing pretty well, and they have technology panels as part of their value proposition or innovation panels, but they don't have their own meeting to go deep into that topic. I think that Confex is a category that could be successful in many big, broad, old school, horizontal industries that they need a technology and innovation discussion. And I believe that we're probably going to see some opportunities on that front. I joined a board and we co-founded a small group of event investors here in US with some friends and industry colleagues. And we're backing Confex because we believe that Confex will have a pretty good opportunity for growth. If you are an event entrepreneur and you want to launch a trade show, it's not impossible, but it's not as easy as it sounds. Same thing with festivals. Confex still require a limited amount of capital in comparison with other verticals, and you could build a nice scalable business. But again, there are many models, and Hyve is one of the leaders on that model in different industries. But if you ask me, I will focus on something small, tech, innovation centric on an industry that is big enough to justify scale. Because the other problem is you need to invest on bringing the right buyers. That is not easy or affordable, and that investment requires some scale from the sponsorship and exhibitor, which means you want to be sure that you have at least 400 or 500 brands, potential exhibitors, ready to deploy capital into your event, because if it's too niche, you're probably going to struggle with making the event sustainable.
Brilliant. And Sophie, what are some of the ones you've seen? Because I know you said that the Confex events are now like pushing into corporate, and some corporates are looking at this quite seriously. So with
Not sure.
Dreamforce and Microsoft and actual brands are starting to roll out meeting programs and conferences, and there's a trade show element. So not just commercial organizers who are doing it for ticket or exhibition revenue. There's actually companies that are trying to promote themselves and their ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a kind of a new phenomenon with the likes of the juggernaut that is something like Dreamfest or Dreamforce or Sapphire. And I think that speaks to the kind of wanting to be able to activate their brands on lots of different levels, lots of different ways, and also having the budget and resource to say, right, we will go out and we will do our own event, because perhaps those brands weren't seeing that from the trade show community. But I think there's sort of a catch up there. But in terms of a Confex that is really worth looking at, they tick two of the webinar bingo today, because they're actually called RecFest, and they very much, it's designed as a festival event. It serves the HR community. They really are looking to deliver wellness, engagement, team building. It's very whole person centered, but at its heart, it is a Confex. It's a paid for program, small number of senior individuals and high value brand activations. And I think that's a really good example of how this has taken the kind of person-centric trends that we've seen emerge and combine that with a really smart business model. Now, they also do it semi-outside, so fresh madness there. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting event to watch. They did really well last year, picked up a few awards for their event, and truly feels quite different. So that would be one to have a look at.
Thank you very much. Great example. I'm going to look at those guys. Hopefully, doing it outside, it's not in the UK. Hopefully, it's somewhere
Oh yeah,
sunny
it's
like
in the
southern
UK.
Spain. Oh dear, that is very
Yeah.
brave of them, even in the summer. It will rain. Yeah, I mean, from what I've seen, Confex obviously is a Confex event called Confex, and it's happening next week in London in the XL. So that's another good example. Obviously, it's powered by Grip, but it really is a great show with thousands and thousands of people attending, meetings. And I think the thing to say about meetings is sometimes it's pre-scheduled, timed meetings, and also just ad hoc meetings that can be arranged through whatever event tech platform they're using. But I think what we're seeing is these kind of neo Confexes, the new wave Confexes that have the trade show, the conference, but also the meetings part, whether that's structured or unstructured meetings. Jess, tell me a bit about Hyve. So I'd love to dig into some of your events. So are Confex events for every industry, for every brand? Because I think you've done a few that have worked and maybe some that haven't worked quite as well. And why might they have worked or not worked?
Yeah, I think there will always be sectors where a more traditional model, it works. I think Marco mentioned the kind of tech focus and disruption. That's really good for a Confex. Absolutely agree, right? If you look at our acquisitions over the last few years, they all have that element of disruption where people need to get together. There's all these different elements to discuss. It's not just about buying and selling. There's kind of other things happening. When we look at events like Spring Fair or Autumn Fair, which is traditional UK retail, right? You've got buyers from a John Lewis all the way down to your kind of mom and pop that's on the high street. They need to go to an event to look and touch and feel and discover. Yes, you can do some of that online, but if you're buying a blanket or pillows or some physical product for the first time, you probably want to actually know what the quality is like. You might do a lot of your reordering online, but we still see a need for that initial discovery. There's also just the efficiency of it, right? To have all of those suppliers in one place versus having to go through kind of scores of pages. And that's one where we trialed the meetings program and we learned that it wasn't the right audience for it, that they were used to a different type of model and they preferred that model. Now, is there still a little bit of a content element? Of course, right? There's always going to be a desire to learn. You have to have something to draw the buyers in. But it's the traditional model, it works really well. And as long as you are working to get the right people in the room and you're still focusing on the buyer side, and do you have that seniority, that traditional trade fair, it might work. I think once you get into more of the kind of manufacturing and defense and some of those sectors where, again, it's a lot of large scale physical product exploration, the models, a lot of them are working. And so you might have some niches within that where a Confex makes sense. And there's kind of a subgroup that wants or needs to get together in a different way or connect in a different way. But I think there will always be sectors where a trade fair, it works, and it will need to evolve slightly around it. You'll need to make sure that the value prop is still meeting the needs of attendees. But I don't think the answer is kind of blanket, move everything from a trade fair to a Confex and then you'll solve all of your problems. That is definitely not the recommendation.
Yeah, we don't want to give people that recommendation and then send them off a cliff. That would be terrible. But could you give us some examples, name some of the shows that might be working really well as Confexes, and maybe, I don't know if you're allowed to, name the shows that maybe didn't work quite as well as Confexes?
Yeah, so I think I talked about ShopTalk a little bit. Health is another example where you've got that Confex model. Possible, which is happening in April, so that's focused on kind of MarTech. And then when we think about, I think I'll phrase it not as ones that didn't work as a Confex, but ones where the trade fair and the more traditional model does work. That's going to be an event like a break bulk. So that's in the shipping sector. There are elements of a Confex that we might bring in, and you might have certain aspects of it. You might have like lower price tickets, or you might do kind of table talks, but it's not going to be that kind of large scale. I think Autumn Fair or Spring Fair are probably the best examples of a really traditional trade fair where that model works, and you've got some aspects of it that will continue to evolve as the needs of the buyers and sellers in that space evolve. But the core of that event will be product discovery. And to do that, it's all about space on the floor and showcasing your product. So I think that physical product element plays a role as well, versus more of a kind of solution tech side of it, where you can do more with less space.
Yeah, it makes me think of Beauty World, which is in the Middle East, and it's very much, as you said earlier, Sophie, and you were just saying there, Jess, around an experience where you get to look and feel the product. I mean, you can't test a lot of this beauty, makeup, hair stuff by looking at online. You've got to be there in person, and they turn it into even more of an elevated experience by having barber competitions and the smell of the show, where they have a competition to come up with the scent of the show, and all the participants vote on it, and perfumery houses are involved, and it's pretty cool, and you just elevate the whole thing to another level. So these Confexes make it even bigger than it was before. Marco, I want to come to you because obviously in the investment world, 7 out of 10 startups fail. So in your time, more, yeah, I mean 9 out of 10 VC backed startups, definitely. So tell me a bit about the failures that you've seen and why they failed. I think I'm really interested, and our audience would be interested in the why.
How much time do we have?
We can have 3 hours for that one.
Look, if you're launching events like in any other startup category, failure is part of the game. I think that launching trade shows, as I said before, is not impossible, but it's getting difficult at scale. I see shows, you were asking about previous shows, a show like Maison and Objet, which is a rich show for interior designers. You want to see the product, you want to touch the product, which means a classic Confex model is probably not easy, but they're adding Confex topics into that experience, which means you can run a trade show and add a meetings program, a one-to-one meetings program on top of a trade show, and add value to your visitors. I love that because they are moving into the right direction in terms of curating more and giving more opportunities for buyers and sellers. From an investment perspective, I see premium prices on Confex, yes. Jessica is a good example, buying great assets at a premium multiple from an enterprise value perspective. But I also see trade shows selling extremely well, and also hybrid models where the digital component represents a significant chunk of revenue. Those shows are selling at a premium because the buyer wants to keep that digital engagement and revenue alive and keep growing. Again, going back to the previous topic, if you're an event entrepreneur, it's a fantastic time to be around because you can build different concepts based on your specific industry and add value through a Confex model. Hosted buyers, we didn't talk about hosted buyers, but many hosted buyer events, they're pretty similar to Confex because the audience is super highly curated, and the meeting component is very important. At the end, I think that the big companies, private equity and strategics, they're going to keep buying Confex because it's proven that it works and it's sustainable. We didn't mention InsurTech is another show where I was involved, now owned by Clarion, growing extremely well, healthy, geocloning. We didn't talk about geocloning, but for Confex, it's a no-brainer to geoclone your show in Europe, Middle East.
Geoclone. Can you explain that to our audience?
Sorry,
that's a new one on me.
If you have a brand here in US that is successful like Money 2020, most likely you're going to launch that brand in Europe, Asia, Middle East, Latin America sooner than later because the show is smaller. And the reality is that most likely you're not going to fly from Singapore to Vegas for a couple of days. Most likely you're going to stay in Asia and have your own geoclone version. It's like a copy-paste branding. It's a pretty technical name, sorry about that. But you got the idea. For Confex, it's a no-brainer. It's a fantastic way to grow.
Brilliant. Yeah, we call them rip-offs here. But yeah, I get it. Geocloning. That's brilliant. Well, I guess it could be geocloning within your own company, so you're not ripping it off. But a fast follower could come up with something very similar, which is what we're seeing a lot of, actually, which is FOMO, where you end up with someone like Money 2020 launching their Must Meet program, where there are, for the first time this year, or sorry, last year, they did pre-scheduled meetings. And then suddenly the phone starts going and all the competitors saying, we want that as well. So I think people look at these big ecosystem events, they see what these Confexes do and very, very quickly copy them. And I think that's why we're probably seeing this growth. Sophie, I'm going to come to you. I want to talk about skills, because there's a lot of people on this webinar who are, event directors, event ops. What are some of the skills that you're going to need to pull off a Confex confidently and make it grow, do you think? Why are those different than traditional trade show, for example?
Well, I think many people in the industry traditionally were trade show specialists, and they were absolute magicians at creating something out of nothing. It wasn't traditionally necessary to have a really deep understanding of the industry that you're serving, and also a really deep understanding of learning styles, creating a sense of occasion, and curating, creating a cadence through the day. So if you think about a trade show, people are free within that set of walls to really follow their own experience, be as busy or as calm as they like. If you've got a Confex element, you're really borrowing now from skills from the conference sector, which is saying, okay, we're actually going to take you on more of a journey. You're much more reliant on the organizer to be able to build a really high quality experience for you, and the expectations are much higher as well because you've set that ticket price. So in terms of experience design specialists, content, not just in terms of curating topics, but how are content sessions delivered and put into a program that allows people to have a beneficial educational journey through the day. This is not about sticking kind of 100 talks back to back, PowerPoint at the front, people snoozing at the back. Those really strong conferences have some amazing professionals who are building a content experience, not just a set of sessions. So I think it's interesting that we're seeing trade show organizers looking to buy not necessarily Confex companies, but either companies that are specialists in hosted buyer or specialists in kind of small conference events, because they need to buy that skill set in. And I wonder what we'll see in terms of the event models. Take a closer still, for example. They've always had content sessions at their events. They're fairly content heavy for a trade show organizer, but now they've bought a hosted buyer and kind of Confex style business. Will they be leaning on those skill sets across their other events now to create something totally different? Because it's got that specialism to it that isn't necessarily about being able to kind of execute that 3-day trade show.
I love that. I love that. It's almost like, we're going to buy a business and use those skills across the rest of the business. And maybe what you were saying there made me think about, we could buy a hosted buyer business and turn that hosted buyer show into a Confex. And that's fascinating way of thinking.
But let me give you an example. I think what Sophie said is very valuable. If you're a horizontal trade show company like Informa, Reed, Clarion, Emerald, and you're buying a Confex, most likely you're going to be buying skill sets that you're going to clone into other portfolio events. And InsurTech is a good example with Clarion. When they bought InsurTech, they geo-cloned the show in other parts of the world, but they also use specific skills from that show for other events. The main skill that I see on Confex people, they're very granular. They're obsessive with identifying buyer and seller and matching that buyer and seller. That skill on trade shows is more generalist. On Confex is laser focus, and you want to be sure that you attract these people. And that's super valuable for trade shows. And let's be honest, they don't know how to do that as well as Confex guys.
I think there's also around the kind of consultative sales side of it as well. Like it's much harder to sell a package of 4 different products than it is to really focus on square meters with maybe a little bit of sponsorship. So what we've seen is a real kind of level change in our sales teams, because you have to be able to draw out from your solution providers, what are you trying to get out of this? Because it might be a different combination of space versus sponsorship versus meetings versus something else, right? But how do you create a package that's going to deliver the most value, rather than just selling something kind of bog standard that isn't going to drive them to come back next year, because you're not meeting their needs. And every company will have a different measure of what success looks like at the event, which adds a whole nother layer of complexity. But I think that different type of sale and salesperson is another thing that we see, right? It's a different level of training. It's a different way of connecting with and interacting with customers. It's very trainable, but the more you can think about selling in this space as consultative and holistic, the better you'll be as a salesperson within the event sector.
Well, I also get the sense of what you're all saying is these meetings mean that you've got more data now, and a lot of these shows are data driven, which means you need the sales team to have the skills to be able to read that data, to be able to go back to the exhibition or the exhibitors and say, look, guys, you might have this many meetings, or your competitor had this many meetings, or the average for your industry is this many meetings, and you could be doing this at the next show, or you didn't do enough this show. You need to get more out of it to enable them to get more value from these Confexes. Jess, I'm just going to share something while I ask you a question. So I'm going to share this, which is a message from our sponsor. Before I give the message, the next question I'm going to ask you is just around these micro events. Someone asked a question in the attendees about, it seems like there's lots of small events happening within the Confex events, and you talked about table talks. Someone's talked about round tables. So I'd love you to kind of tell us a bit about those and how those function within the context of a Confex event. But before I do that, I am going to give you a message from our sponsor, and the sponsor is us. Hooray, it's Grip. We're the sponsor of today's webinar. And we are saying there's another webinar coming up. Oh, the next one's going to be exciting. We are talking about connections over content. So how event organizers are adding meetings to their event in loads of crazy ways, which kind of ties into this a bit, which is, roundtables, structured meetings, unstructured meetings. Richard Barnes, the CEO of Worldwide Events, is going to join us, and his meetings and connections at his events happen in crazy kind of ways. So there's firewalking, they do them on trains, speedboats. They have all the meetings on speedboats. It's pretty crazy. So it's all about luxury travel. So he's got some great examples. So yeah, please do join us. Scan the QR code, register now. So yeah, Jess, coming to you. Tell us about these micro events within an event, because it seems to me like Confexes, this is a hard gig, right? Because you've almost got 30 different events happening inside one event.
Yes, it really comes back to the curation, right? Because if you do too much, then you're going to make it so that everyone's kind of spread out. You can't get all of the value. It's why we don't have our meetings overlap with content, right? It's not fair to make people choose. You've paid for a ticket to be here. We want to make sure that you're able to access the areas that you're most excited about. So a couple of kind of events within an event, if you will. We call them table talks at some, we call them round tables at other. What we're doing there is they're typically for the kind of buyer side, or at BET, which is an ed tech event, they're going to be for the teachers, so the educators, the users of the technology. And those are kind of closed door sessions where the buyers, whether it's retailers and brands or the teachers, are able to pick topics that they're most interested in, and they are sitting around with a table of their peers, having really open discussions. That is one of the ways that we've been able to really drive value on the buyer side, right? How can we deliver more above and beyond to get those high quality buyers in the room and participating? And that's something that we've seen work really well. At ShopTalk, we even let you choose, do you want to be at a table away from your competitors? Do you want to be at the same level of seniority, or do you want it mixed? We have some female only tables as well, right? So you're really able to kind of curate what that discussion is going to be. We typically hold them over a meal time, so whether it's breakfast or or lunch, again, then we're not really taking away from the content or the time to walk around the show floor, but how do we maximize every minute that we can for our attendees with those events within an event, as you coined them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I love that because it comes back to what everyone's been saying around, it's not just chucking on loads of sessions. You've got to plan those sessions around the meetings and everything else that's going on. So it feels like it's a really complicated dance that you're kind of choreographing here. Right, very rapid fire. Last one. I just want to talk about the future. Where are Confex events going in the future? Marco, keep it short and sweet, but tell us, what do you think the future of Confex events are?
Many more launches and new Confex coming for sure in different sectors. I think that the important thing to survive is going to be scale. If it's too small, probably it's not easy to sustain. If it's too big, it's going to look like another trade show, which means the scale for the Confex, from my perspective, is very, very important. You want to be sure that you have the right people in quantity, but more important in quality. And I think that as a category will continue to grow. I don't think that it's going to kill trade shows. I don't think that it's one or the other. I think that both could complement each other in some specific industries, and I'm pretty bullish on the category, and I believe that it's going to continue to grow.
Fantastic. And Jess, do you think the category is going to continue to grow? Where do you think it's going next? What's the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly as you have more and more sectors or kind of end markets continue to be disrupted by technology, this is a format that works really well. So I think we'll see continued, I think, a little bit of consolidation, right? You'll have kind of larger players come to the forefront, but agree with Marco that this really is going to be the path forward in quite a few parts of the world. You'll still have trade fairs; they're still very relevant and important. You'll still have conferences as well, but that for a large part of a large number of end markets or sectors, Confexes are really going to continue to take off and be the main type of event.
Wow, that's big words there. They're going to be the main event. Confex is going to be the future. It's going to be dominant. Fantastic. I love it. And Sophie, finally, what do you think the future Confex format is?
I think this is probably an area of our industry that's very likely and already is being disrupted by AI, because the right kind of learning models can take a large community, a large data set, and start to really drive really curated content ideas, really hyper-focused meeting suggestions, and be that engine with a kind of Confex being the end point of it. I think the ability to create Confexes will be driven by AI in future.
So they're going to get bigger, and they're going to be easier to do, in inverted commas, easier. Yeah, it's not a hard thing to pull off, but I think with AI, it's going to make it easier. Yeah, exactly. Well, lastly, can we just thank our panelists? I'd just like to find out where people can get in touch with you to find out more. Marco, how can people get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is the easiest way. I also have a website, marcogiberti.com. Happy to be in touch.
Brilliant. So if anyone on the webinar wants to sell their event to Marco, please get in touch with him. Jess, how can people get in touch with you?
Same, LinkedIn is the best way for me.
Excellent. I turn my LinkedIn notifications off. I just get so much rubbish. But yeah, no one wants to talk to me anyway. Everyone wants to talk to Sophie. How do people find out about you, Sophie?
I mean, you can send me free cake,
yes.
but failing that, also go with LinkedIn.
I'm all for the free cake. Fantastic. Well, thank you guys. That was absolutely informative. I've learnt a new word, geocloning, and I am going to research that right now. So all it remains for me to say is thank you very much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And we'll see you on the next one, which is the 1st of April. And it's not April Fools. Lovely. Thanks, guys. And we'll see you soon.